Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me and that my slides are projecting.
Yes, we can hear you well and your slides are properly projected.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for this opportunity and thank you for the invitation to share some thoughts about the mRNA Technology Hub based in South Africa. Professor Tamori, I'm not too sure whether I can run fast enough to avoid you getting at me, but indeed, sir, it's a privilege to be sharing this this platform with you, and good to connect again. Hopefully, we can do so face to face sometime soon. So, I think essentially, Oyewale and I are going to deliver the same key messages. And that's comforting because we have not consulted in the preparation for delivering our presentations this afternoon. But I think we have converged on the same key thoughts, and I'll probably just tackle these things from slightly different vantage points and perspectives. So a little bit about the AVMI. As you mentioned, I've been part of the AVMI team for a while now, and it was established for the sole purpose of ensuring that we have capacity in Africa in a critical situation. We have been hard at work, and some of the work I've put up here on the slide, the development of what we call the VMPA study, Vaccine Manufacturing and Procurement in Africa study, supported by WHO and others. We've worked with UNIDO in the drafting of these 2 white papers, and then we've worked with TIBA, Tracking Infections to Benefit Africa, in the establishment of convening of a conference focusing on an integrated African vaccine policy, all of which I think now, with us being in the midst of COVID, has become very, very relevant. Essentially, the VMPA study concluded the following, that there is a requirement for multiple players on the African continent, and one needs to appreciate that this was well before COVID, 2015, 2017. So there was space for multiple players on the continent. It's very important that they could possibly be distributed across regional hubs. But critically important is that it would require the right level of political and technical support that would ensure that we have a clear, well-founded, coherent regional policy making and planning approach, and that it would lead to the development of the required ecosystem. Very, very important that one appreciates that this is about building an ecosystem to support vaccine production on the continent. I think that thankfully, we can reflect back on the progress that we've made with the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing under the leadership of the African CDC, and that we've made good progress in terms of getting this coherent approach at least underway. Still a distance to go, but it is work in progress. So we've assembled around a long-term vision as captured in the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing. I would hope to believe that the paradigms are changing. They don't change easily. And I think we all have a part to play in dislodging ourselves from certain paradigms. But my vision and aspiration is that all of us, ourselves included, will never question the fact that quality can come from Africa with respect to vaccines in the future and going forward. So there's a lot of work in the formation of the framework for action, realizing this vision, working together and across countries. So with that as a backdrop, I'm going to share some key perspectives on what it takes to establish vaccine manufacturing capacity. And then try to link this up with how we need to look at this mRNA technology. So this is a very busy slide, but the important message of the slide is that there are many different ways to skin a cat, as they say. So there are many different ways to approach building capacity for vaccine manufacturing. And essentially, each organization, each country needs to settle on the approach that works best for them. Now, without going into the detail of what all these models are, the expanding routine model, the outbreak model, the downstream model, etc., the message is that there are very many different models that one could use, and they're not also mutually exclusive. And these models, depending on what you then settle on, they then have a pathway that they provide for moving from point A to point B. From the shorter term initial investment that required, one needs to ensure that they connect with the longer term objectives and goals and the vision. Again, a lot of detail on the slide, but the take-home message is that these are key considerations in terms of the investment pathway, where you begin and where you want to end. Another important consideration is this balance of time frame, capital investment, and the risk. And again, these models, I think, promise to deliver against certain time frames, and some take longer, some are quicker. And essentially, if you start with downstream, which is packaging and labeling, and you move slightly upstream towards perhaps filling and finishing, as they say, you can achieve that in a shorter time frame. But if you're looking at end-to-end vaccine manufacture, then you're talking about 5 to 10 years. So that's another important consideration. And then there are ways in which all of these factors come together, connect with the stakeholder group within the internal ecosystem within Africa, within certain African countries, but importantly, how it connects with collaborative partnerships outside of Africa as well. So the message here is that it takes a multiplicity of factors to pull this thing together. So when one thinks of setting up a fully fledged vaccine manufacturing operation, there are several considerations to consider simultaneously. And I'm not going to go into the detail of this. This we could unpack and take another 2 hours to unpack. But the take-home message here is that it's complex. It requires several factors to align. Wide-scale collaboration, partnerships are absolutely critical, because if you try to do it on your own, you're going to take forever and you're going to carry all the risk yourself. So the timelines are long, the risk is high because of the complexity of the activities and the way the ecosystem is structured, and the financial investments required are substantial over this period of time. So to position this appropriately, you've got to think of, well, if I'm going to take 10 years or 5 years to build this capacity, while building the capacity, you're burning money at a heck of a rate without earning any money through vaccine product sales. And so you've got to make sure that you've got enough working capital across that initial period to fuel that activity, so that when you get to, so that you can get to the commercialization of product and revenue generation. Now, I think Oyewale touched on this, and again, the detail here is not important. This looks at pipeline candidates for various vaccines under development. But the take-home message here is that everything doesn't rise and fall on the back of mRNA technology. And there's some critical questions to ask about the mRNA vaccine technology as well. But we cannot only afford to focus on the mRNA technology. We've got to think that if we want to ensure that we as Africans have the ability to shift the needle from 1% production in Africa towards 60% production in Africa in the next 20 years, we need a multiplicity of platforms. So why is this excitement about mRNA technology? We have experienced that these products are highly efficacious through the Moderna and BioNTech Pfizer vaccines, that they do work. The speed at which they can be developed and new vaccines can be developed other than COVID is very attractive. And also the kind of, and I don't want to make it sound too simple, but the kind of plug and play that once you've got the capability installed, it is not such a burden of effort and time to make product number 2 off that same platform. And I won't dive into why that's possible now, in the interest of time. But this little graphic on the right shows that, just by way of example, that when you look at certain other technologies and the scale at which you need to operate, this shows that per 1 million vaccine doses, you can see that RNA and DNA vaccines are in a class of their own in terms of the facility and scale requirements. So that's very attractive. This I got from Martin Friede at the World Health Organization, and it shows that there's a lot of activity in the space with respect to mRNA vaccines. A number of different players in different stages of maturity with respect to their vaccine products. So BioNTech and Moderna are not the only game in town, and that some are working on what is called improved second generation technologies, perhaps lower cost of goods, perhaps more stable at reasonable temperatures, 2 to 8 degrees, simpler formulations, etc. But there's a lot of activity in this space. Again, all the activity is not focused on the COVID vaccine. That there are a number of efforts around developing other products, and the list is projected here. So this is the other attractive thing about the promise of the mRNA technology, that other products can be made from this. But I think to appreciate and understand the potential impact, that has yet to be proven. Now, there's no reason to doubt that it can be achieved, but as they say, it's not done until it's done. So there are several factors to consider, and you might have seen this in the media about IP and intellectual property and the freedom to operate. It is something that the hub itself will have to navigate forward and hopefully will solve. But I'm not going to spend too much time except to flag that that is something key that has to be sorted out. The whole issue of technology transfer is important because developing a technology takes longer, costs more, and carries more risk. However, if you can partner with someone, then that can be accelerated. And much of what is on the slide here shows you the partnerships that have resulted with respect to COVID-19 vaccine, particularly since 2020. And then before that, it shows you what was in place, and those were obviously not COVID vaccines, but they were very limited. Now the space is getting more and more populated because of the need to build its capacity on the continent. Very importantly, is this development in red with respect to the mRNA vaccine technology hub. And Oyewale has already outlined who the players are, so I'm not going to repeat that. But again, technology transfer is the way to go for accelerated capacity building. A key issue that one must not lose sight of is the supply chain. This is the supply chain of inputs required to make not only mRNA vaccines, but any vaccines. But obviously, with respect to mRNA, there are specific requirements. And these reagents and consumables, like even plastic bags for the reactions to take place in, can become a bottleneck, and one needs to forward plan to ensure that these are available as and when required. This is stating the obvious, that you need a production facility that meets GMP requirements. It needs to be licensed and approved by the local national regulatory authority, and it needs to have capabilities, a number of different capabilities for the different unit processes required to make these vaccines. One can go the conventional brick and mortar route, or you could go the route of prefabricated or biocontainers, and these have their pros and cons. And then I think the last point under this section to consider is the whole financing thing, and which I already highlighted, but it needs to be a mix of government inputs. It doesn't need to be a direct financing, but there needs to be a catalytic financing coming in, private funding, development banks, etc. But the issue which Oyewale also addressed is this whole issue of market demand certainty, because without that demand certainty, all of this investment of time, effort, and money, even if we are successful first time around, will come to naught if we cannot sell our product and then generate the revenue to sustain these operations. And then obviously this has been, the last point has been, I think, tabled and discussed on many different platforms with respect to should there be a regional distribution of these initiatives, again, not only applicable to mRNA vaccines. So with that in mind, just a thought or two about the way technology transfers can be structured. The typical way is a bilateral technology transfer, where manufacturer one passes the process to manufacturer two under a bilateral agreement, and Biovac has had 3 of those now, one with Pfizer for their pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, one with Sanofi for the hexavalent vaccine, and then the last one with Pfizer for the mRNA vaccine. But what we're trying to do now with respect to the hub is create a better value proposition by establishing this technology transfer hub. That becomes the platform to then distribute the technology to multiple manufacturers, so that there is greater dispersion and greater access to the sought after technology, and in this case, it's the mRNA vaccine technology. I'm not going to repeat this. I think Oyewale has covered it well, and I'm happy to take questions with respect to some of the details behind how this thing is actually coming together. We've heard about this, that Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, and Tunisia have been announced as the additional hubs to South Africa recently, but also to note that Argentina and Brazil have been identified as, companies from Argentina and Brazil have been identified as spokes from the South American region. And then Vietnam, I think it's Bangladesh, and 2 or 3 other companies or countries have been earmarked as well to be spokes. But this will be a list that grows over time. So to end then, here are my thoughts about understanding the impact of this hub. So the first thing to appreciate is that the mission and vision of this hub is basically to shift reliance away from a few companies for global supply of vaccines, especially in pandemic situations, which can be considered public goods. And we do this by increasing the capacity within regions to manufacture these sought after health products, to provide a more equitable access to these products. And it will allow more countries and companies to make their own vaccines, which would lead to an investment in their local economies, the building of the infrastructure, the building of biotechnology skills, generally socioeconomic development, and a reduction of money leaving the countries as well. Key to appreciate, in my opinion, is that this affords Africa, for the very first time, to be connecting with a novel technology, so to be where the waves are breaking, and be a leader, so that this time around it's going to be from Africa into Africa and into the rest of the world as well. And I think that that is something that we should appreciate more and acknowledge more in terms of the long-term impact, in terms of what this could have for us as an African continent, connecting with this novel technology and being responsible for the dispersion of this technology to other parts of the world. And lastly, the ability to be in a greater state of readiness with respect to future pandemics, that if this technology delivers according to its promise and potential, that we could adopt a more flexible approach in terms of plug and play, and it would be an easier step to get to a point of commercial production of the next pandemic. But key again is this whole issue of sustainability versus building the capacity. It's one thing to establish capacity, it's another thing to sustain this capacity. And sustainability is not linked to pandemic vaccines. A pandemic comes now and again. One has to build the sustainability. The key factor in the sustainability equation is the production of routine vaccines, and that needs to be supported by all of us in our local countries and by our African governments. So with that, my final thoughts are partnerships are key. Financial investments are not trivial. They are huge and significant. Our expectations need to be realistic. And I think that our success, or Moderna's success and BioNTech's success in getting to a vaccine, a novel vaccine so quickly, has kind of distorted what can be realistically expected in terms of developing products, because the story before was that you took years to do it. This time around, building on the history of what they had done before, they hit the jackpot first time around, and we're very thankful for that. But we need to calibrate our expectations going forward, otherwise we're going to disappoint ourselves. Market and access and sustainability, I beat that drum already. And we need to focus on products other than COVID. This conversation should not be about COVID. It should be about vaccines other than COVID, vaccines other than pandemic vaccines, meaning routine vaccines as well. So with that, I would thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to engage in any questions and try to answer that to the best of my ability. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Patrick, for that very explicit discussion.